Since the Trump administration withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, tensions between the U.S. and Iran have escalated, especially in the last few weeks. You might remember hearing headlines about how the U.S. has been accusing Iran of attacking an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman. Iran denied this. Around the same time, Iran said it would increase its enrichment of uranium. That violates the very nuclear deal that the U.S. pulled out of, but that many other countries remain in. Then the U.S. announced it was adding more troops to the Middle East. A few days later, Iran shot down an unmanned U.S. drone. So, in retaliation, President Trump said he had ordered a missile strike, but at the very last minute, he called it off, saying the loss of life would be a disproportionate response. Instead, he went with a cyber attack. So, U.S. Cyber Command launched an offensive cyber attack on Iran's rocket control systems. That comes after reports that hackers, believed to be working for the Iranian government, had been targeting U.S. government agencies.
When we did the nuclear treaty with Iran, we saw a very big dip in activity when it came from Iran attacking our infrastructure, our grid. Those have since increased substantially, so they're definitely trying to hit us at home.
So let's back up. How long have these attacks been going on for? And if Iran is reportedly hacking into the U.S., where do these attacks fall on the spectrum of tensions between the two countries? Are we in a cyber war with Iran?
I don't think we can say that the U.S. is at war with Iran just yet. We are at a point now where we haven't seen this level of back and forth ever when it comes to Iran and the United States. So we have to be really careful with how we leverage cyber capabilities in this specific case and not to go overboard.
Has this been the first time that the U.S. and Iran have gone back and forth on cyber warfare?
But they've definitely gone back and forth quite a bit over the past few years. And with Stuxnet and a lot of the other different things that we've done when it comes to a cyber perspective around Iran, they've shut themselves down from the global internet. So it's actually more difficult for us to hack into them.
How would you describe Stuxnet?
With Stuxnet, what is loosely attributed to a joint operation between Israel and the United States, essentially create malware, malicious software, that went into these research facilities and caused misreadings to occur. It was an amazing victory for us because we literally sent their program back several years of research. So when it comes to cyber, we could obviously blow up nuclear reactors. That doesn't really stifle the growth or research that Iran was conducting when it comes to nuclear missile testing.
Is the line between cyber warfare and kinetic warfare blurring?
It's blurring more and more every single day. And when it comes to military, we always have a severe advantage when it comes to the other countries that we're going against. But when it comes to cyber, we're on equal playing fields. In the event that this goes out into a full-blown war, where we're actually conducting operations against Iran, I think you'll definitely see some major attacks happen from a cyber perspective from Iran to us that we haven't seen before and that we're probably pretty unprepared to handle as well.
There's still a lot we don't know about the impact of the U.S. cyber attack on Iran, or what the end result actually looks like. What does the escalation in cyber warfare mean for the relationship between Iran and the U.S. and the region as a whole?
This is John.
I spoke with John Bateman, who used to be the Director for Cyber Strategy Implementation in the Office of the U.S. Secretary of Defense. Is this something that the public should consider as an act of war?
The line between peace and war in cyberspace is unclear. What I would say is that you have to consider this operation within the context of the tit-for-tat between Iran and the United States. Iran has already admitted to shooting down a U.S. drone, and so in this context, the U.S. would have legal authority to strike back at those systems that had been used to target U.S. forces.
How do these events impact geopolitically the region as a whole, do you think?
I'm hoping that the recent cyber operation by the U.S. was enough to cool things down and give breathing room to both sides. Because the U.S. is able to hold its head high and say that we did something, we responded proportionally, while Iran is able to claim, although not very credibly, that they thwarted the cyber attacks and nothing really happened. In the long run, it's not in the region's interest for tensions between U.S. and Iran to persist at this heightened stage. We can look back to a similar period between 2010 and 2012 when U.S. and Iranian tensions were really high under the Obama administration. Those tensions eventually led to the nuclear deal, but it's not clear that the conditions for that exist today because Iranian politics leave much less room for negotiation with the United States the second time around. And so we can expect further crises to pop up as the U.S. continues to tighten sanctions on Iran and Iran continues to explore taking steps to move beyond the nuclear deal and ramp up its enrichment activities.
Even though these cyber attacks are at the forefront of the news right now, Trump has made it clear that kinetic military strikes are not off the table.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.